Why was everyone staring like she didn't belong there? The desert wind pushed against her flight jacket as she crossed the tarmac, sand lifting in thin, shimmering veils under the morning sun. Horvath 7 stretched before her, rows of steel hangars, communication towers piercing the pale sky, and soldiers moving with the rhythm of routine. Avina Sultan adjusted the strap of her satchel and kept walking. Each step echoed like defiance. She'd been away for years, buried under a file stamped MIA, whispered about like a ghost no one dared name. And now, walking through the same gate that once knew her boots, she felt the weight of that silence pressing from every direction. A voice cut through the hum of engines. "Are you deaf, Sultan? This area's off-limits to civilians. Get out." Colonel Holt's bark was sharp, carrying the arrogance of a man used to obedience. He stood near the hangar door, posture rigid, jaw set, a portrait of authority that didn't know it was already outdated. Around him, a few guards stopped mid-motion, rifles half-slung, eyes flicking between the stranger in a faded flight suit and their commanding officer. Avina didn't stop. She walked until the sunlight pooled around her boots and the scanner light above the gate blinked to life. Then came the chime, soft, mechanical, absolute. "Welcome, Commanding Officer Avina Sultan," the AI voice announced. The hangar froze. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Holt's face drained of color, and the young technician beside him turned toward the console like it had betrayed him. The green lights kept flashing. Every locked door clicked open in sequence. Avina removed her glove, holding up the titanium insignia, Department of Defense crest engraved deep enough to catch the light. No words, no dramatics, just a quiet revelation of fact. The woman he'd just ordered off his base wasn't a civilian. She was his new commanding officer. Her expression didn't gloat. She simply tucked the insignia back into her pocket, movements precise, deliberate. The silence between them tightened until even the hum of the air filters seemed too loud. Someone coughed. A wrench clattered somewhere deep in the hangar. Still, no one spoke. Holt's fingers flexed at his sides, his voice buried somewhere behind the shock that strangled him. Avina waited, her eyes calm, almost patient. She'd expected this. Resistance, disbelief, ego, it was always the same currency in places run by men like him. The moment she'd stepped through the main gate that morning, the trouble had already begun. At the checkpoint, the guards had looked her over with lazy dismissal. Major K. Thorne, tall, wiry, and too sure of himself, was the first to smirk. "What's this, Sultan? You get lost on your way to a costume party. That flight suit's older than my car." His laugh spread like a stain. A few guards joined in. Avina said nothing. She simply unzipped her satchel and pulled out a single sheet of paper, duty seal crisp at the top. K's grin faltered. He leaned closer but waved it off. "Paper doesn't mean anything. You don't belong here." Lieutenant Resacor, barely 30, crisp uniform, ambition sharp enough to cut, stepped forward. She, grown up hearing the stories, Avina Sultan, the pilot who vanished during a classified mission in Syria. The myth, the mystery, the whispers of betrayal. But the woman standing in front of her didn't match the legend. No medals, no entourage, just tired eyes and steady hands. Ressa bent down to pick up an identification badge that had slipped from the satchel. She turned it over, skepticism painted across her face. "Nice work," she said dryly. "Looks almost real." She tossed it back. Avina caught it without blinking. "Call the commanding officer." Her voice was low, even unbothered. From the control booth, Holt appeared, boots heavy on the metal steps. "I'm the commander here," he snapped. "And you're violating national security. Search her bag." The guards moved instantly. The satchel hit the table, files spilling open, red-stamped classified pages fanning out like accusations. A photo slid free, grainy desert background, a downed helicopter, Avina dragging a wounded soldier through the sand. A young private froze, staring at the image. He looked up, meeting her eyes, and in that split second something passed between them, recognition, maybe respect, but he said nothing. He slid the photo back while Kayer kept barking. What's this supposed to be? A movie prop? Holt grabbed the satchel himself, flipping through its contents. You've got 10 seconds to explain why I shouldn't have you arrested. Avina's reply was quiet. Check the biometrics. 2 words that detonated in the silence. The colonel's smirk faltered. Scanner's malfunctioning, he barked, slamming the red override button before anyone could respond. The screen blinked in protest, a low electronic whine filling the air. It wasn't malfunctioning. Everyone knew it. He was blocking the command verification, a blatant violation of Regulation 37 Alpha, the kind of thing that could end a career if anyone dared report it. But no one moved. Fear has its own chain of command. Avina didn't flinch. She stepped closer, slow, deliberate, eyes not on Holt's face, but on his thumb pressing that red button, an image of insecurity more damning than any word. The tech officer beside him, Lyra, barely 23, looked torn between orders and conscience. The tension stretched so tight the room could snap. Finally, Holt's pride cracked. Fine, he muttered, stepping back. The scanner hummed. Avina placed her thumb on the pad. The console pulsed blue. Access granted. Command level A1. No one spoke. Even the machinery seemed to hold its breath. Kayer's voice was barely a whisper. A1, that's commander clearance. Holt's jaw tightened, the realization swallowing whatever authority he thought he had. Avina didn't wait. She pulled her other glove off, the titanium insignia catching the cold light. Commander Avina Sultan, Department of Defense. The words landed heavy. Before anyone could react, the wall screen blinked. General Corvin Vale appeared, voice steady. Report to her directly, Holt. That's an order. Then the screen went dark. The hangar exhaled all at once, like the building itself knew something fundamental had shifted. Avina turned toward the crew, her expression unreadable. Resume operations, she said simply, and walked past Holt without another glance. Behind her, whispers began, soft, stunned, half afraid to be heard. Later that day, the briefing room smelled of stale coffee and tension. Holt stood at the front, his tone sharp, performative. Someone listed as missing in action doesn't just waltz in and take over my base. The officers around the table shifted uncomfortably. Avina sat at the back, her satchel beside her, hands folded. She didn't interrupt. Kayer leaned forward, his smirk back. We need real soldiers, not a poster girl. Laughter trickled through the room, forced, brittle. Avina waited for it to die, then said quietly, I wrote the tactics manual you're holding. The sound of pages closing echoed like gunfire. No anger, no raised voice, just the truth sharp enough to cut through arrogance. The laughter stopped. Kayer's face flushed red. Holt glared, but even he felt the ground shift. Then, unexpectedly, a young officer at the far end cleared his throat. Sir, if Commander Sultan was missing, why does the new encryption system, the Phoenix cipher, register under her name? He turned his tablet around. On the screen, the most recent update to the base's digital core, signed off with a timestamp from 3 months ago. Holt stammered, That's placeholder code, I approved it myself. Sir, the officer said carefully, your clearance for level 9 encryption expired 6 months ago. Silence. Avina watched the realization ripple across the room. Doubt, confusion, quiet calculation. She didn't speak, she didn't have to. Truth, when left alone, grows loud. The meeting dissolved into murmurs. Ressacor's eyes stayed locked on Avina, a storm of old admiration and new fear warring behind them. She'd heard the rumors. Avina had betrayed her team in Syria, gone rogue, left her people to die. She wanted to believe them. It was easier that way. So when she finally stood and said, This says you abandoned your squad, her voice trembled with conviction she didn't entirely own. The room froze. Avina tilted her head slightly. "Read the report again," she said. "All of it." Ressa hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen, then sat down. Holt slammed a palm on the table. "I'm filing to suspend you pending review. This base won't be led by a ghost." Avina didn't reply. Later, alone in the mess hall, she saw the headline glowing from a tablet someone had left behind. New Commander's shady past raises questions. She didn't pick it up. She just drank her coffee, the bitterness grounding her in something real. Around her, whispers swirled like dust. A few young lieutenants at the next table muttered loud enough to be heard. "Bet she's just here for the photo ops." The mug hit the table softly. She stood, eyes steady, and walked out. The whispers stopped. Respect sometimes begins with silence. Outside, the wind had picked up, carrying the dry scent of oil and jet fuel. She walked along the perimeter fence, her gaze tracing the horizon. That's where the young warrant officer found her, Sila's, hands shaking, clutching a worn notebook. "Ma'am," he said, voice cracking. "5 years ago, Operation Skyfall, Colonel Holt got the Gold Star for tactical leadership." He swallowed hard. "But the original field logs, they were signed by you." He opened the notebook, pages filled with faded ink and flight coordinates. "You planned everything." He locked the data down, rerouted the report, erased your name. Avina said nothing. Her eyes stayed on the horizon, that endless desert bleeding into the sky. When she finally nodded, it wasn't anger, it was acknowledgement. The cost of integrity is silence. Silas looked relieved, like confession itself was enough. "We all knew," he whispered. "We just didn't know how to prove it." She turned, started walking back toward the base. "You just did." The sun dipped lower, staining the sky amber. Somewhere far behind her, the engines of Horvath 7 roared back to life. Inside the hangar, Holt stood before his reflection in the glass of the control room, staring at the ghost of his authority. For the first time, he saw it fear. The kind that comes when power starts slipping through your hands. Down on the tarmac, Avina stopped. She looked at the aircraft lined in formation, the same models she'd once flown, the same sound that haunted her sleep. In the distance, she heard laughter, officers leaving the briefing room, voices fading into the hum of the night. Her hand brushed the edge of her flight jacket, old, worn, stitched over too many times to count. She exhaled slowly. The desert air was cold now, sharp against her skin. Tomorrow, she knew, they'd try again, to undermine, to question, to erase. But tonight she would simply exist. The silence around her wasn't empty, it was earned. And somewhere deep inside that stillness was the faint echo of a truth she'd never stopped believing. Dignity doesn't argue, it endures. How far can a person's silence be pushed before it starts to speak louder than orders? The next morning, the desert sun hit the base with its usual precision, merciless and bright, burning through the haze of early drills. The air hummed with motion. Vehicles rolled out from the hangars, officers shouted commands, but something in the rhythm had changed. Horvath 7 had a new pulse now, quieter, steadier, and every beat carried the unease of adjustment. Avina walked the line of aircraft as crews prepped them for the day's operations. Her boots struck the metal flooring in an even cadence, eyes moving over every detail, the refueling lines, the pressure gauges, the crew coordination that once came as second nature to her. Every few seconds, someone stole a glance in her direction, most quickly looked away. The ones who didn't lingered too long, like they were trying to measure what kind of commander she really was. She could feel Holt watching her from the control tower. He'd already begun maneuvering, calling quiet meetings, whispering into ears too ambitious to ignore him. That was how men like him worked. They built small kingdoms of resentment and called them loyalty. But Avina didn't move to counter him. Not yet. She knew power that rushed to defend itself was power already lost. By midday, the heat turned brutal. Inside the operations building, Air conditioners hummed against the desert's persistence. The command room glowed with blue monitors showing radar sweeps, encrypted transmissions, and weather updates from hundreds of miles out. Avina stood behind the primary console, reviewing the training schedule for the day. Her voice was even when she spoke. Simulation parameters stay within standard limits. No deviation from flight paths unless authorized directly by me. Major K. or Thorne leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, the faint smirk still anchored on his face. Permission to speak freely, ma'am. Avina didn't look up. You already are. He chuckled under his breath, but the humor didn't reach his eyes. With respect, these parameters are outdated. The squadron's been running tighter formations for months now. Maybe you haven't been keeping up. The jab was obvious, the tone deliberate, the room held its breath. Avina didn't answer right away. She tapped a few keys, pulling up the data from the last exercise. The numbers filled the screen: error margins, fuel inefficiencies, comm lag, all just slightly worse than regulation tolerances. She turned the monitor toward Kair. If you've been running tighter formations, she said softly, you've also been running less efficiently. The numbers don't lie. A few officers shifted in their seats. Kair's jaw tightened. Data doesn't capture everything, Commander. No, she said, but results do. Her gaze held his for a fraction too long, long enough to turn the room's silence into something weighty. Then she turned back to the screen. Run the drills as ordered. When the meeting broke, whispers followed her out. Holt was waiting at the end of the corridor, arms folded, eyes cold. A word. She stopped. You think you can waltz in here with your classified files and command-level clearance and expect these people to follow you? His voice was low, tightly wound. You're an outsider, a rumor. You were gone for years. I built this base from the ground up. Avina's voice stayed level. Then you should have built it on integrity. He took a step closer. You think I'm afraid of you? No, she said quietly. You're afraid of what you did before I came back. For a second he froze. She saw it, the flicker in his eyes, that tiny fracture in his certainty. He masked it quickly, forcing a smile that didn't belong on his face. Careful, Commander. Accusations like that can bury a career. Avina's reply was almost a whisper. So can truth. She walked past him, her shoulder brushing his sleeve. The contact was minimal, but the message was absolute. That afternoon, the desert turned gray under gathering clouds, rare for Horvath 7, where even rain was treated like a rumor. Avina stood in the observation bay overlooking the landing strip, hands folded behind her back, eyes tracing the distant mountains. She could see her reflection in the glass, tired eyes, streaks of dust on her sleeve, the faint outline of a woman who had fought too many quiet wars. Ressa Kaur approached from behind. Her voice was cautious, almost reluctant. Ma'am. Avina didn't turn. Lieutenant. Ressa hesitated, then said, Colonel Holtz filed a formal reassignment order. It's already been sent to command. Avina nodded slightly. Let me guess, obsolete station, minimal staff. Snowpoint Weather Facility, Ressa admitted. North Perimeter. Avina exhaled through her nose, just a faint sound, neither surprised nor angered. 48 hours. Yes, ma'am. Ressa swallowed, guilt tugging at her voice. I mean I wasn't part of this. I know, Avina said softly. You wouldn't have told me if you were. She turned finally, and Ressa's breath caught. There was no trace of resentment in her expression, just weary calm. Tell the colonel his paperwork violates Regulation 44C03. Subsection B, reassignment of command-level personnel, requires 96 hours and an external review. Ressa blinked. You're challenging it. I'm correcting it, Avina said. There's a difference. She walked away, leaving the younger woman standing in the hallway, uncertain whether she just witnessed courage or something far colder. By evening, Holt's office door slammed hard enough to rattle the glass. Kayer was already there, packing. She called it flawed, sir. She cited the exact regulation. Holt's fist hit the table. Of course she did. She's been planning this. She's not supposed to be this calm, Kayer muttered. I thought she'd snap by now. Holt glared at him, then pushed harder. Outside, the base lights flickered against the clouds, lightning cutting faint veins through the sky. In her quarters, Avina sat by the window, a soft yellow lamp throwing shadows across her desk. The room was bare. No medals, no decorations, just the essentials. On the table lay a stack of mission logs, faded photographs, and the satchel that had followed her since Syria. She pulled out the same picture the private had seen at the gate, the helicopter crash, the wounded soldier, the desert that almost took them all. Her fingers brushed over the image. For a long time she said nothing. Then, barely audible, she whispered, I didn't abandon anyone. Outside her door, someone hesitated before knocking. Enter, she said. Jax Orland stepped in, gangly, nervous, clutching a tablet. Ma'am, you need to see this. His voice trembled. It's footage from the control room. He set the tablet on her desk and hit play. The screen showed Holt and Kayer leaning over a console, whispering about how to make her look incompetent. Avina watched without blinking. When the video ended, she said only 2 words, send it. Jax hesitated. To who? Command backup channel, encryption 7. He nodded, fingers shaking as he executed the transfer. Then he looked up. Ma'am, it's not just them. I found something else down in the sub-level server bank. You need to see it for yourself. Minutes later, they were descending the narrow metal stairs beneath the main comms building. The deeper they went, the colder the air became, humming with the low pulse of machines. Jax's flashlight swept across tangled cables and steel conduits until it stopped at a small, rectangular module taped to the back of a primary router. This isn't standard, he whispered. It's a hardware override, military grade but off-registry. It's transmitting a ghost signal during drills, creates false enemy activity, and overheats the reactor coolant pumps. He looked at her, face pale. If they'd run another full simulation, it would have triggered a containment shutdown. Avina crouched, inspecting the device. The serial number caught the edge of the flashlight beam. Recognition flickered in her eyes. She knew the supplier, Black Ops Tech, discontinued years ago, the kind of hardware that didn't appear without authorization from someone high. She didn't touch it. Instead, she opened her satchel and pulled out a compact toolkit and a small camera. Quietly, efficiently, she began documenting everything, the wiring, the angles, the ID code. Evidence, not vengeance. When she stood, she met Jax's gaze. Not a word about this to anyone. He nodded, yes, ma'am. Back in her office, she uploaded the files to an encrypted drive, then leaned back in her chair. The hum of the bass echoed faintly through the walls, a mechanical heartbeat she'd learned to trust, even when people failed her. She knew what came next. Exposure was war. But she'd fought wars before. The next dawn, she issued the order. Initiate emergency drill, code name Red Phoenix. The announcement rolled through the base like thunder. Sirens blared. Soldiers scrambled to posts. Jets roared to life, slicing through the morning haze. From the tower, Holt watched the chaos unfold, confusion twisting into anger. What the hell is she doing? He snapped. Kayer leaned over the comms panel. She's running a full-scale defense simulation. Says it's a readiness test. Holt's voice dropped to a growl. Then let's make sure she fails. He started issuing orders, subtle tweaks, small enough to seem accidental, adjusted flight paths, swapped signal frequencies, just enough to fracture coordination. Down in the command center, Avina stood behind the main console, observing in silence as the screens erupted in warnings. Comms interference, target misreads, jet formations crossing dangerously close. She didn't move. Lyra, the tech officer from earlier, looked up in panic. "Ma'am, the system's glitching." "It's not glitching," Avina said. "It's showing us the truth." The simulation ended in disaster. If it had been real, the base would have fallen in under an hour. Holt stormed into the control room, face flushed with fury. "This is your failure, Sultan. You pushed this drill just to humiliate us." The room was thick with tension. Officers shifted uncomfortably. Ressa stood by the door, eyes darting between them. Avina didn't answer him. Instead, she tapped a console key. The main screen lit up, security footage of Holt and Kayer plotting the sabotage. Their voices filled the room. "Change the flight paths, make it look like her plan failed." The silence that followed was suffocating. Every officer froze. Kayer's lips parted, but no sound came out. Holt's hand trembled. "That video's doctored," he shouted. "Fabricated." Avina didn't argue. She switched to another file, a purchase order linked to the same serial number from the hidden hardware module. The supplier, the amount, the date, all traced to Holt's private account. "Fabrication can be debated," she said quietly. "Financial records cannot." For a moment, the only sound was the hum of machines. Then Holt's shoulders sagged. Kayer looked like the ground had vanished beneath him. Avina stepped forward, her voice steady, clear. "Report that the base fell because of arrogance." And then she turned and walked out. No one followed. Outside, the wind tore across the runway, carrying sand and silence in equal measure. She stopped at the edge of the tarmac, staring into the blinding horizon where heat met sky. Every lie had finally burned away. But truth, she knew, was never the end of war, only its beginning. How do you fight a war when the battlefield wears a suit and smiles in the same hallway? The sun had barely risen over Horvath 7, but the tension was already thicker than the desert heat. Word of the Red Phoenix drill had spread across every wing of the base like wildfire. Some whispered that Commander Sultan had pushed it to test Holt's loyalty. Others claimed she'd nearly caused a meltdown. Either way, everyone now knew one thing: nothing about Horvath 7 would ever be the same again. In the mess hall, soldiers sat in hushed clusters, forks clinking softly, eyes flicking to the entrance every few seconds. When Avina walked in, the air shifted. Conversations died mid-sentence. A few officers straightened automatically, unsure if they should salute or just look away. She crossed the room with her usual calm, picked up a coffee, and sat at an empty table. The tablet someone had left behind was still glowing, headline bright against the metal surface. "Commander's reckless drill PUTS lives AT risk." She didn't touch it. She sipped her coffee instead, slow, steady, letting the bitter taste anchor her. Across the room, 3 lieutenants whispered. One leaned forward, muttering, "I told you she was unstable. They should have never brought her back." The one beside him, younger, quieter, just watched her. "Maybe she was right," he said softly. "The system failed, not her." But the others weren't listening. Gossip spreads faster than truth, especially in places that run on hierarchy. Avina set the mug down. The sound, a quiet, deliberate clink, cut through the whispers like a warning. She stood, her boots echoing softly as she walked out. She didn't say a word, but silence has its own authority. Outside, the desert wind clawed at her jacket, lifting fine dust into the air. She could see the flight line stretching into the horizon, jets glinting under the sun, crews moving like clockwork. Everything seemed normal, but beneath the hum of engines and routine was a current she could feel, fear disguised as discipline. She knew the headlines wouldn't stop. Holt and Kayer would keep pushing, feeding the press with fragments of half-truths. They were desperate now, and desperation was the most dangerous enemy of all. She walked along the perimeter fence, lost in thought, when a voice called out behind her. "Ma'am." It was Ressa Kaur. The lieutenant's uniform was perfect, but her face wasn't pale, restless, eyes rimmed red. She jogged to catch up, a tablet clutched to her chest. I have something you should see." Avina stopped. "Go on." Ressa hesitated. I don't know who to trust anymore. Major Kayer, he's acting strange. He's been pulling records from the archives, security logs from Syria. He said it's to verify your past missions, but she trailed off, uncertainty filling the space. But you don't believe him, Avina finished. Ressa shook her head. No, ma'am, I don't. Avina studied her face for a moment, then said quietly, loyalty isn't about who you serve, Lieutenant. It's about who you protect when no one's watching. Ressa nodded, something breaking through her composure, a flicker of regret maybe. They said you abandoned your team. I wanted to believe that wasn't true. Avina's expression softened just slightly, then stopped wanting, no. Before Ressa could reply, the intercom crackled overhead. All personnel, command briefing in 10 minutes. Mandatory attendance. Ressa looked relieved for the interruption. I'll see you inside, ma'am. When Avina entered the briefing hall, the room was already full. Holt stood at the front with Kayer at his side, both posturing in crisp uniforms and rehearsed authority. A large screen displayed lines of data and video stills from the Red Phoenix drill. Holt's tone was sharp, performative. This so-called emergency simulation resulted in system overloads, comm failures, and a full tactical collapse. Under any other command, this would be grounds for immediate suspension. He paused, scanning the room for reaction. Kayer stepped forward, projecting false calm. We've reviewed every detail, and the conclusion is simple. Commander Sultan's methods are reckless. She's a liability. Murmurs spread through the officers, nervous and unsure. Avina sat near the back, silent, her hands folded over the satchel that never left her side. She could feel Ressa's eyes on her, hesitant, searching. Then Holt delivered the line he'd been waiting for. I move for her immediate removal pending investigation. The room tensed. It wasn't an official tribunal, but it was theater, and theater had power. Avina stood slowly. The motion was small but drew every eye. Her voice was quiet, steady. If this is a performance, Colonel, you might want to check your script. Holt smirked. Excuse me. You're missing the part, she said, where you explain why the same module that nearly melted our reactor last week was purchased under your private account. Gasps rippled through the room. Holt's composure cracked. You're making baseless accusations. Avina tapped the console beside her. The main screen changed. Financial logs, shipment codes, serial numbers, dates, every piece tied to him. Baseless, she asked softly, or buried too deep to think I'd find? Holt froze. For a moment, no one dared speak. Then Kayer stepped in, voice rising. Enough of this. These are fabrications you forged. Stop, Ressa said suddenly. Her voice, though trembling, carried through the room. Every head turned. She stood, holding her tablet. Those files are real. I've seen the originals. You told me to copy them, Major. You said it was protocol. Kayer's face went white. Lieutenant, watch your tone. But Ressa didn't back down. You told me if I questioned you, I'd lose my position. You made me believe Commander Sultan was dangerous, but she was. You were. The silence that followed was electric. Avina didn't move. Her gaze stayed on Holt, unreadable. You used fear to control your people, Colonel. You called it leadership. I call it survival instinct dressed in uniform. Holt's jaw tightened. You think you can destroy me with this? No, she said quietly. You already did that yourself. The meeting collapsed into chaos. Voices shouting, chairs scraping, orders shouted and ignored. Within hours, command had been alerted. Holt and Kayer were both placed under temporary review, but temporary in military terms could mean anything. That night, the base didn't sleep. Rumors moved faster than the desert wind. Some said Holt would be arrested. Others whispered that command was covering for him. Avina didn't feed any of it. She stayed in her quarters, lights dim, reading through a flood of encrypted reports pouring into her private channel, statements from officers who'd served under Holt, all echoing the same story. manipulation, falsified records, hidden orders. But mixed among them was something she hadn't expected: messages of support. One read, "You don't have to prove yourself anymore, ma'am. We've seen enough." Another, "For the first time in years, this base feels honest." She stared at the words for a long time. Then she closed the tablet and leaned back in her chair, exhaustion washing over her. In the quiet, she could almost hear the echoes of that day in Syria, the sound of rotor blades dying, sand whipping against metal, voices shouting through static, the smell of burning fuel, the weight of another soldier's body as she dragged him through the desert. Her hand went to the scar under her collarbone, faded but permanent, proof that the past never fully leaves. She whispered to the empty room, "They'll never understand what it costs to come back." The next morning brought no peace. The investigation had triggered a review hearing, an official one this time, the kind where careers died quietly. As Avina entered the conference hall, cameras flashed. Media crews had been allowed limited access, and she could feel their eyes hunting for a reaction, for weakness. Holt sat across from her, pale but composed, his lawyer whispering in his ear. Kayer avoided looking at anyone. General Vale appeared on the main screen, remote but commanding. "Proceed." The first hour was procedural: questions, documentation, testimonies. Then came the ambush. A new piece of evidence surfaced, an encrypted data stick, anonymously submitted, containing mission logs from Syria. The files claimed Avina had sold coordinates to the enemy during her final operation. Gasps filled the room. Avina didn't move. Her pulse didn't even quicken. She'd expected this. Holt leaned forward, eyes gleaming with false confidence. "Well, Commander, care to explain how your signature ended up on a transmission to hostile forces?" She looked at him for a long moment, then said evenly, "Whoever forged those files should have checked the timestamps. That encryption protocol didn't exist until 2 years after the mission." A ripple of realization went through the tribunal. Ressa stood suddenly, voice shaking. "It's fake. Kayer gave it to me, told me to plant it in her satchel." The room erupted again. Avina didn't look at Ressa, didn't need to. Forgiveness was silent. General Vale's voice cut through the chaos. "Enough. We've verified Commander Sultan's credentials. The files were fabricated. Colonel Holt, Major Thorne, you're both under arrest for sabotage, falsification of evidence, and gross dereliction of duty." The guards moved in. Holt's composure finally broke. You don't know what she is," he shouted, but his words dissolved into noise. Avina stayed seated. She didn't watch them leave. Vale's voice softened. "Commander Sultan, for the record, the Red Phoenix drill prevented a real reactor meltdown. You saved 318 lives. The department owes you more than it can repay." Her reply was quiet. "It wasn't about debt, sir. It was about truth." When the call ended, she stood slowly, the weight of the last weeks pressing down on her shoulders. The room was nearly empty now, just Ressa, standing off to the side, tears streaking down her face. Avina walked over. Ressa tried to speak, but words failed. I was wrong," she whispered. "I know," Avina said gently. "Now go make it right." Outside, the sun was setting, washing the base in gold. Jets lined the runway like silent sentinels. The air smelled of oil and ozone and something cleaner: justice, maybe, or the start of it. Avina walked past the hangars, each step measured. She won technically. The truth was out. But victory in places like this never felt like triumph. It just felt like quiet survival. She stopped near the edge of the runway, looking toward the horizon where the sky bled into flame. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to breathe without defense. The wind caught her hair, lifting it slightly, and for a moment it almost looked like she was weightless. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the metal of a nearby aircraft, older now, but stronger. "You don't lead by shouting," she thought. You lead by standing. And in that silence, where the past finally let her go, she understood something she'd never said out loud. Sometimes integrity doesn't win you medals, it wins you peace. Under the cold desert moon, the base slept uneasily. The night air carried the faint metallic hum of the hangars and the low drone of generators. The hearing was over, the orders had been signed, and Colonel Holt and Major Kayer had been escorted off Horvath 7 in silence. Still, the silence they left behind was not peace. It was the aftershock of something that had broken and not yet healed. Avina sat alone in her office, the lamplight falling across the report stacked neatly in front of her. On top lay a small photograph, the one taken years ago in Syria, her younger self pulling a soldier from the wreckage. The edges were frayed now, dust ground into the paper from countless times it had fallen from her satchel. She traced a thumb over the burned edges. The faces in the picture were gone, but the weight of them remained. A soft knock broke through her thoughts. "Come in," she said. It was Jax Orland, his glasses fogged from the temperature change, hair standing in disarray. He looked like he hadn't slept. "Ma'am," he said, "the press wants a statement. Command suggested." "No," she said gently. "They already have their story. Let them tell it." He hesitated. "They'll twist it again." "They always do," she said, "but the people who matter have seen enough." Jax shifted, uncomfortable with the stillness. "Ma'am, if it's all right, I wanted to thank you, for believing me. Most officers would have." She raised a hand, cutting him off softly. "You saw something wrong and you told the truth. That's all the thanks you'll ever need." Her tone wasn't sharp, just final. He nodded, understanding. When he left, the door clicked quietly shut, leaving her once again with the hum of the base. Out on the flight line, floodlights burned white against the desert floor. Crews moved like shadows around the aircraft, performing maintenance checks. The entire operation felt cleaner, steadier, as though everyone was relearning how to stand upright. Avina watched them through the window for a long moment, then turned back to her reports. The next morning came early. At 600 hours, she was on the tarmac again, clipboard in hand. The wind smelled of jet fuel and dawn. Lieutenant Ressacor approached, boots crisp, expression uncertain. The scars of the past week still showed in the way she carried herself, pride bent but not broken. "Ma'am," Ressa said, stopping at attention, "I wanted to." Avina didn't make her finish. "You're transferring to command school," she said. "Effective immediately. General Vales already approved it." Ressa blinked. "I didn't request a transfer." "No," Avina said, "you earned it." Ressa's throat tightened. "After everything I did." Avina met her eyes. "After everything you chose to undo." Ressa nodded once, emotion flickering behind the discipline. "Thank you, ma'am." "Don't thank me," Avina said. "Just lead better." She turned back toward the runway, signaling to the ground crew. The first training flight of the new cycle lifted into the bright sky, engines roaring. For a few moments, the noise was all there was, pure, powerful, cleansing. Inside the command tower, the new staff worked quietly. Orders were followed, reports filed, comms checked. It wasn't fear anymore that kept them efficient. It was respect, something that could only be built after arrogance had been stripped away. Still, there were wounds. You could hear them in the way people spoke, slower now, as if measuring every word. By midday, Avina was summoned to the comms center. General Vale's holographic projection flickered to life, his uniform gleaming under virtual light. "Commander Sultan," he said, "Headquarters has reviewed your leadership under duress. Your status has been fully reinstated. Effective immediately, you are promoted to Brigadier General." Avina stood still. Promotions were supposed to feel like triumph. This one felt like gravity. "Understood, sir." Vale's expression softened. "You earned this, Avina. You held a line most would have abandoned." She inclined her head. "With respect, sir, the line was never mine to abandon." The transmission ended. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of machinery. Around her, officers looked up from their stations, some smiling faintly. A few began to clap, unsure if they were allowed to. She nodded once, permission granted, and the room filled with the sound of hands coming together, hesitant at first, then strong. Outside, under the blinding sun, Avina stood for a long time, watching the horizon. The promotion meant more responsibility, more scrutiny, but it also meant closure. The ghosts that had followed her from Syria were quieter now. Holt and Kayer were gone. Their names would fade from reports, scrubbed from history in the way the military erased its own mistakes. She didn't need to see them punished. She had seen justice served in silence. As dusk fell, she walked the perimeter. The sky bled into deep indigo, the air cooling. At the far end of the fence, she stopped, hands resting on the chain link, eyes on the stars just starting to appear. For the first time since she had come back, she felt the quiet wasn't an enemy. A voice broke the stillness. "Ma'am." It was Silas, the young warrant officer who had first told her about Holt's stolen commendation. He looked hesitant, shifting from one boot to the other. "I just wanted to say," he began, "the men, well, they talk different now, about leadership, about you." She smiled faintly, just enough for the corners of her eyes to soften. "They'll forget the story soon enough." He shook his head. "Not this one." She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. When he left, she stayed there a while longer, letting the sound of distant turbines wash over her. The desert night stretched endless, and for the first time it didn't feel like exile. It felt like belonging. Back in her quarters, she removed her jacket and hung it neatly on the back of the chair. The new insignia caught the lamplight, a gleam of titanium, sharp and still. She looked at it for a moment, then at her reflection in the small mirror above the sink. The woman staring back wasn't the one who'd left for Syria years ago. That woman had believed in orders. This one believed in conviction. She poured herself a cup of coffee, the last of the evening pot. It had gone bitter and cold, but she didn't mind. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly, rolling across the horizon. Somewhere far off, rain was falling, a rare gift in the desert. She thought about all the people who'd tried to silence her. The laughter in the mess hall, the whispers in the corridors, the orders shouted over her voice. Each one had carved its own scar. And yet, through every cut, she'd stayed standing. The door beeped, a message on the internal system. She tapped the console. It was from General Vale again, just a single line of text, deployment request pending. Optional assignment, Eastern Command Intelligence Division. She stared at it for a long moment, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. She knew what it meant. Another mission, another silence to endure. She closed the message without replying. Outside, lightning split the horizon. For a second the base was bathed in white light, stark and clean. She set the mug down and whispered, almost to herself, "Let them remember the silence, not the storm." When dawn came again, Horvath 7 awoke to a new rhythm. The soldiers moved with purpose. The fear was gone, replaced by something steadier, trust, maybe, or hope. Avina walked through the hangar, returning salutes with a nod. Jax called out reports from the control tower. Ressa's transfer papers had already been processed. The engines roared to life for the morning sortie, and the smell of fuel filled the air. As the first aircraft climbed into the sky, Avina paused to watch it. The jet banked east, catching the light on its wings, slicing through the clouds. It was freedom, pure and deafening. She turned away and headed back toward her office, her boots leaving faint prints in the sand. The desert wind erased them almost immediately. That was fine. Not everything needed to be remembered. Inside, she picked up the photo from Syria one last time and slid it into a folder marked archive. Then she closed the drawer. There was nothing left to prove, nothing left to reclaim. Only the quiet work of leadership, the kind that happens when no one is looking, when no one applauds. She looked out the window at the brightening horizon, at the base she had rebuilt without firing a single shot. The jets roared again, the sound folding into the wind. And in that thunder of engines she heard it at last, the echo of her own heart, steady, unbroken. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts, and when it's done, it walks away, leaving only the sound of silence behind. They called it calm, but it wasn't peace. Horvath 7 had a new rhythm, a quieter one. The chaos was gone, but the echoes of what happened still lived in the corners of every hallway, in the glances exchanged between soldiers who had once doubted her and now couldn't meet her eyes. The desert sun rose the same, harsh and unrelenting, burning away shadows that refused to leave. Avina Sultan walked across the tarmac as the morning drills began. Jets roared overhead, cutting through the dawn, and for the first time since taking command, no one questioned her orders. The salute she received now wasn't forced, it carried weight. Respect born not of fear but of something cleaner, but she didn't bask in it. Command wasn't about admiration, it was about steadiness. Still, every salute, every nod of acknowledgement carried the quiet memory of resistance. She could feel it when she entered the control tower, the shift, the subtle hesitation before her officers addressed her. It wasn't mistrust anymore. It was guilt. They were learning to respect her, but also to live with what they had done when they didn't. Inside the glass room, the world looked different. The desert stretched endlessly, gold and bone white, the air shimmering over the heat vents. Jax Orland stood at the main console, his glasses slipping down his nose as usual, tapping at a data stream. "Morning, ma'am," he said. "Forecast shows a storm rolling in from the west, first one this year." Avina nodded, her eyes on the horizon. "We'll shut down Flight Ops 2 hours before it hits. Last time this base saw a storm, it cost a comm tower." Jax grinned faintly. "Yes, ma'am, I read the report. Colonel Holt blamed it on an act of God." Her voice was quiet but sharp. God had nothing to do with Holt's neglect. Jax froze, then nodded, the grin fading into a sheepish respect. "Understood, ma'am." Avina turned to the digital map of the base projected on the wall. "We'll use the downtime for system recalibration and personnel reviews. I want to know who's been reassigned since the tribunal and who's still under internal watch." "Yes, ma'am," Jax said, typing quickly. One thing, there's a request from command. They want you to review an encrypted case file." She raised an eyebrow. "Classification level." 11, he said. "Top tier, even I couldn't open it." That got her attention. Level 11 wasn't standard military protocol. It was intelligence territory, the kind of clearance reserved for shadow operations. "Send it to my secure terminal," she said. When she reached her office, the encrypted case file was waiting, glowing faintly on her monitor, sealed with a crimson emblem that hadn't appeared since her years in covert operations. The Phoenix Division. Her stomach tightened. She hadn't seen that insignia since Syria. She entered her biometric code and the lock dissolved. The report unfolded in layers, maps, coded transmissions, and photographs marked confidential, eyes only. The words at the top made her sit straighter. Operation Umbra, subject Colonel Everett Holt, status, active containment pending. Her fingers froze above the keyboard. Containment pending. That meant he wasn't in a civilian prison. He'd been detained by intelligence. She scrolled further. Lines of text blurred together. Recovered assets include encrypted communications between Holt and a foreign contractor network. Evidence suggests unauthorized trade of defense algorithms, including the Phoenix cipher. It wasn't just corruption, it was treason. Avina leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. So this was why the promotion had come so suddenly, not just recognition but responsibility. They hadn't finished cleaning up the fallout. They wanted her to finish it. She looked at the screen again. Beneath the classified details was a message written in General Vale's clipped tone. "This remains sealed under your discretion, General Sultan. Do not engage unless provoked. Umbra assets are being relocated. You are authorized to observe, not interfere." Observe. That was the language intelligence used when they expected chaos but didn't want to be blamed for it. Avina closed the file. For a long time, she stared at her reflection in the darkened screen. Command had cleared her name, they'd restored her rank, but they hadn't told her everything. Holt wasn't gone, not completely. The next days passed in deceptive calm. The storm Jax predicted rolled in, bringing sheets of rain that turned the desert floor into slick mud. Operations slowed, and soldiers worked under tarps and floodlights. The base felt almost human again, laughter in the corridors, music leaking from rec rooms, life returning where silence had ruled. But beneath it all, Avina felt the pulse of something unsettled, the kind of stillness that precedes movement. It came to her one night when she was reviewing weather logs. A knock at her door, quiet, hesitant. "Enter," she said. Lieutenant Ressa Kaur stepped in, drenched from the rain. Her hair clung to her face, eyes shadowed by exhaustion. "Ma'am," she said softly, "I think you need to see this." She handed Avina a small data chip, dripping water onto the floor. "I found it during the comms system audit. It was hidden in one of the older relay consoles. The serial code matches Holt's encryption style." Avina's jaw tightened. "You're certain?" Ressa nodded. "Completely, but the timestamp is after his arrest." That was impossible. Avina inserted the chip into her console. Static flickered across the screen, followed by a grainy video feed, a dimly lit cell, concrete walls, a man sitting at a metal table, head bowed. Then he looked up. "Holt." He was thinner now, eyes dark with something feral. When he spoke, his voice was cracked but steady. "You think this ends with me, Sultan. You have no idea what you're standing on." He leaned closer to the camera. "You were never supposed to come back. You were part of it, all of it. You just forgot." The video cut to black. For a long time, Avina didn't move. Ressa stood frozen, the storm pounding outside like the echo of Holt's words. Finally, Avina said quietly, "Delete this from every system it touched, then wipe the backups." Ressa hesitated. "Ma'am, if this is—" "I said delete it." Ressa nodded, eyes wide, and left without another word. When the door closed, Avina leaned forward, pressing her palms against the desk. The rain outside grew louder, hammering the roof, a steady drumbeat of chaos trying to get in. "You were never supposed to come back." The phrase gnawed at her. It wasn't a threat, it was a reminder. She remembered the mission in Syria, the orders that never made sense, the coordinates that led them into an ambush, the radio silence from command that lasted just long enough to cost lives. She'd always assumed it was a tactical error. But what if it hadn't been? Her chest tightened. The Phoenix cipher, the same encryption project Holt had tried to hijack. She had written parts of it herself years ago, back when she still believed in the chain of command, in the sanctity of classified work. But someone had taken it, twisted it, buried it under fake names and shadow funding. And now Holt's words made sense. He hadn't been acting alone. At 200 hours, she pulled on her jacket and crossed the rain-soaked tarmac toward the comms bunker. Jax was still awake, as usual, working through storm diagnostics. He jumped slightly when she entered. "Ma'am, I need access to off-grid transmissions from the past 48 hours. Anything that didn't route through base relay." Jax hesitated. "That's restricted too." "I know, do it anyway." He nodded quickly, fingers flying across the keyboard. Lines of encrypted traffic appeared, bursts of code, scrambled messages bouncing through satellite pings. One caught her eye immediately. "Stop," she said. The timestamp matched the video Ressa had found. The source ID wasn't civilian, it was internal. The transmission originated from Horvath 7. Her own base. She stared at the screen, the meaning sinking in. Someone was still communicating with Holt's network. "Who has this clearance level?" she asked. Jax swallowed hard. "Only command officers, ma'am. You, me, and Lieutenant Core. Maybe one or two others with temporary access during the tribunal. List everyone, she said. He started compiling names, the keys clacking fast under his shaking hands. Outside, lightning split the sky open, flooding the room with white light. For a moment, it illuminated Avina's face, calm, focused, almost cold. When the thunder rolled, she whispered, more to herself than to him, "Then it's not over." She stood there for a long time, watching the data stream flicker across the screens, rain sliding down the glass in jagged rivers. She could feel the war returning, not with weapons or commands, but with whispers, files, and invisible betrayals. And somewhere deep inside, part of her almost welcomed it. Because Avina Sultan had never been built for comfort, she was built to endure. The storm outside broke fully then, lightning cracking open the horizon, wind slamming against the hangar doors. Inside, the lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. Jax looked up from the terminal, eyes wide. "Ma'am, the source file, it's still transmitting." Avina turned to him, voice calm. "Trace it." He hesitated. "If I do, they'll know we're watching." She gave him a look that silenced the fear. "Good," she said. "Let them." As he began the trace, the base around them seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere deep in the hum of servers, a signal pulsed, faint, rhythmic, alive. Avina's eyes narrowed, reflecting the glow of the screens. She'd spent years being erased, doubted, underestimated. Now, whoever had written her out of history once was about to learn something their systems never calculated for. The quiet wrath of a woman who'd already survived the fire. The trace took 47 minutes. The storm had started to fade by then, but its aftermath still trembled through the air, rain dripping from metal gutters, the wind sighing across hangar roofs. Inside the comms bunker, the light from the monitors painted Avina's face in pale blue, her expression unreadable. "Got it," Jax said finally. His voice cracked from fatigue. Source signal originated from the storage sublevel Section D. Avina's eyes narrowed. "That's sealed." "It was," Jax said. "Not anymore." He turned the screen toward her. The access log showed an override command executed 23 minutes ago. The authorizing ID code belonged to someone who wasn't supposed to have clearance anymore, Ressa Core. Jax's voice faltered. "But ma'am, she's in command school. Her transfer was processed 2 days ago." Avina didn't answer immediately. Her hand brushed the edge of the desk, fingers tapping once, an old habit from flight days, a rhythm that kept her thoughts moving. Pull her location from the personnel tracker. Jax hesitated. Already did, her signal's still here, north sublevel near storage D4. She straightened, grabbing her jacket from the chair. "Stay on the channel, lock every other connection out. If you lose signal with me, seal the base." Jax swallowed. "Yes, ma'am." The hallways were dim as she moved through them, emergency lights casting thin red veins across the concrete walls. The air smelled of ozone and damp dust. Somewhere above, the thunder rumbled, fading into distance. Her boots echoed in steady rhythm, each step controlled, deliberate. Section D wasn't supposed to exist on active logs. It was a relic, an underground archive built decades earlier to store experimental tech. The last time Avina had been there, she was still a lieutenant, learning systems no one was supposed to know existed. She reached the access door. The biometric scanner blinked red until she pressed her thumb to it. Green light. The door hissed open. The corridor beyond was darker, colder. Her flashlight beam swept across crates marked with codes she hadn't seen in years. Obsolete drone parts, decommissioned encryptors, old Phoenix Division equipment. Halfway down the corridor, she saw movement. "Lieutenant," she said quietly. Ressa Core stood near the far wall, soaked from the rain, uniform half unzipped, her hair clinging to her forehead. She looked startled, like she hadn't expected to be caught, but she didn't run. Her hand hovered near a console wired into one of the storage servers. "Ma'am," she said breathlessly, "you shouldn't be here." Avina took a step forward. "You used your clearance to access a sealed section. Why?" Ressa's gaze flicked toward the console. "You wouldn't understand." "Try me." For a moment, Ressa's composure cracked. Her voice trembled, but she forced the words out. "You think this is over. Holt wasn't the beginning of it. He was a pawn. There are others higher. They used him to test the Phoenix Cipher's failsafes. When he fell, they needed a replacement." Avina's jaw tightened. "And you volunteered." Ressa shook her head quickly. "No, they found me. After the tribunal, I got messages, encrypted channels, untraceable. They knew everything. My transfer, my clearance level, my weaknesses. They said if I didn't cooperate, they'd bury me like they tried to bury you." Avina's voice softened. "And you believed them." Ressa's eyes filled with something that wasn't defiance anymore. It was guilt. "I didn't have a choice." "There's always a choice," Avina said quietly. "You made yours the second you came here." Ressa's breathing quickened. "You don't understand. They have the original encryption kernel for the Phoenix cipher. They can override every security system from here to the northern defense grid. They said if I uploaded this," she gestured to the drive plugged into the console, "it would lock them out. But when I opened the code," her voice broke. "It wasn't a block, it was an access key." Avina stepped closer. "Who sent it?" Ressa hesitated. "A name came through the transmission header. I don't know if it's real." "Say it." "Vale." The name hit like a gunshot. General Corvin Vale, the man who had vouched for her, the one who'd ordered Holt to obey, the one who'd restored her command. For a moment, the room seemed to tilt. The humming servers filled the silence that followed. Avina's voice, when it came, was steady. "Unplug it now." Ressa reached for the drive, but before she could touch it, the console sparked. A surge of static filled the air. The monitors around them flickered, displaying lines of code streaming faster than the eye could follow. "Too late," Ressa whispered. Avina lunged forward, yanking the drive out with one sharp motion. Sparks flew. The hum died. Darkness. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The emergency lights flickered back to life, weak and red. Avina looked at the drive in her hand, charred at the edge, heat still radiating from it. "What did you just give them access to?" Ressa's voice was barely a whisper. "Everything." Back in the comms bunker, alarms began to sound. Systems flashing. Unauthorized transmissions. Jax's voice crackled through Avina's earpiece. "Ma'am, we're under digital breach. Someone's accessing our satellite link, multiple external nodes. It's the Phoenix cipher." Avina closed her eyes briefly, centering herself. "Cut all network relays. Switch to analog, full isolation protocol." "Yes, ma'am." She turned back to Ressa. "You're coming with me." Ressa didn't resist. The fight had gone out of her. Together, they moved through the corridors as sirens wailed above, the base descending into chaos. Soldiers scrambled to manual controls, power grids rerouted, engines shut down mid-cycle. The storm outside had returned, pounding against the metal walls like an echo of what was unraveling within. By the time they reached the control tower, Jax was already there, sweat slick on his forehead. "It's bad, ma'am. Whoever's behind this is inside our core grid. They're rewriting access trees. If they finish, every command link we have goes through them." Avina dropped the damaged drive onto the console. "We don't stop them digitally. We stop them physically." She leaned over the main map, tracing the base's infrastructure. "They're routing through the main comm satellite, orbital station row 7. It's synchronized with our uplink every 3 hours. If we cut it manually, they lose connection." Jax looked alarmed. "Ma'am, that satellite's 20 miles out near the East Ridge. The uplink relay in the field bunker. No one's been there in years." "Then it's due for a visit," Avina said. She turned to Ressa. "You're coming too." Ressa blinked. "Why?" Because you opened the door, Avina said. You're going to help me close it. The three of them suited up quickly. The rain outside had turned heavy again, hammering the metal walkways as they crossed the perimeter. The wind ripped at their coats, visibility dropping to near zero. The base behind them glowed in flashes of red from the warning beacons, an isolated island of light in a sea of darkness. They moved fast, navigating through mud and shattered gravel until the old bunker came into view, a low, reinforced structure half buried in sand. The steel doors hung slightly ajar. Avina raised her rifle, not to fire but to steady her breathing. "Stay behind me." Inside, the air was stale and metallic. The faint hum of old power cells filled the silence. Broken monitors lined the walls, still faintly flickering with static. Jax moved to the console, connecting his handheld. "The uplink's active. Someone been here recently." Ressa's voice trembled. "Ma'am, look." On the far wall, scrawled in black marker, were 4 words. "We built this to last." Beneath it, the Phoenix Division crest. Avina stared at it, a chill running down her spine. "They never shut it down." Jax's voice rose. "Signal spike. They're transferring something, mass data packets. It's leaving the base right now." Avina moved fast. "Can you block it?" "Not from here. The main kill switch is outside, behind the transmission tower." Rain lashed across the open ground as she sprinted into the storm. Lightning split the sky, turning the world into flashes of white and shadow. The tower loomed above, a steel skeleton humming with power. She climbed, boots slipping against the slick metal rungs, wind slamming into her body with every step. At the top, the kill switch glowed faintly, protected by a mechanical lock corroded with rust. She jammed her utility knife into the gap, forcing it open. The mechanism gave with a shriek of metal. "Jax," she shouted over the comm. "On my mark, reroute power through the auxiliary grid." "Copy." She grabbed the lever, rainwater running into her eyes. The metal burned cold against her skin. She pulled. The tower shuddered. A surge of light burst through the clouds as the uplink overloaded, severing the signal. Sparks exploded in the rain. For a heartbeat, everything went white. When the light faded, the hum was gone. Silence. Avina hung there, breathing hard, the rain pounding against her shoulders. "Ma'am," Jax's voice came through, shaky but alive. "Transmission terminated. They're out." She climbed down slowly, muscles trembling with exhaustion. Ressa met her at the base of the tower, tears mingling with the rain. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't know who to trust." Avina looked at her for a long time, then said softly, "Then start with yourself." They returned to the base before dawn. The power was restored, the alarm silent. Inside the control room, Jax ran diagnostics. "Everything's back under our control," he said. "No residual access." Avina stood by the window, watching the horizon lighten with the first trace of morning. The storm had passed, leaving the air clean and sharp. "Keep eyes on the external network," she said. "If they try again, I want to know before they breathe." "Yes, ma'am." She turned, exhaustion finally catching her. Ressa stood at attention, drenched, pale but steadier than before. "What now, ma'am?" she asked quietly. Avina glanced at the sunrise breaking over the desert. "Now we rebuild, and we remember who tried to erase us." The light reached the horizon then, glinting off the hangars, the aircraft, the still wet ground. It made the base look almost alive again. For the first time in years, Avina allowed herself to smile, not in triumph but in relief. Because sometimes survival wasn't the end of a fight. It was the quiet beginning of truth finally standing on its own. They thought it was over, but peace built on secrets never lasts. 3 days after the storm, the desert seemed unnaturally quiet. No aircraft drills, no late-night comms chatter, no sound except the hum of the base generators. The storm had washed everything clean, except the past. Avina Sultan sat in the observation room, the soft glow of early morning light seeping through the reinforced windows. Below, the soldiers moved with the discipline of a unit still relearning trust. Repairs were almost complete. The systems were clean again. But even now, she could feel the invisible weight in the air, the one that comes after survival, when the body rests but the soul still trembles. She turned the silver phoenix insignia in her hand. It was old, worn smooth by years of friction. She kept it since her covert days, a reminder of what she'd built and what it cost. And now it was a symbol of something she never meant to revive. "Ma'am," Jax's voice broke through her thoughts. He stood in the doorway looking uncertain. "We've got something from the network audit." Avina gestured for him to continue. "It's not a breach," he said quickly, "but it's strange. There's a line of dormant code hidden inside our base comms archive, dated years back before you even arrived." Her gaze sharpened. "Show me." He crossed the room and slid a small drive onto her desk. "I thought it was residual data from Holt's tampering, but it's older than that. Way older." She loaded the drive. The terminal screen filled with old code, handwritten encryption layers she recognized immediately. The pattern was hers. Her throat went dry. "This is mine." Jax frowned. "Yours, ma'am." She nodded slowly. "I wrote this during Phoenix Division. It was part of the prototype kernel." He leaned over her shoulder, scanning the screen. "Then why's it still active?" "Because someone never shut it down." Avina's pulse quickened. "Run a trace, see what it's connected to." Jax hesitated. "If this is linked to intelligence archives, we might not like the answer." "Do it anyway," she said quietly. He ran the trace. The data unfolded, lines of code streaming like a digital map. When the endpoint appeared, he froze. "Ma'am, it's connected to Central Command." She stared at the monitor. The signal didn't route to any field unit or base. It went directly to the Defense Intelligence Corps in D.C., the heart of the military's control network. Her stomach sank. "So they've been listening all along." Jax looked at her uneasy. "Do we shut it down?" She thought about it for a moment. "No, not yet. Let's listen back." He nodded, reconfiguring the stream. For several seconds there was only static. Then a faint voice, distorted by encryption, cut through. She stabilized the system. "Horvath 7 operational. Containment successful. Proceed to Phase 2. Another voice responded, smooth, commanding. "Good, keep her focused. The cipher must complete itself naturally." And then silence. Jack stared at the screen. What the hell does that mean, complete itself? Avina's expression didn't change, but her hands had gone still. The cipher wasn't just a tool for encryption. It was adaptive code, a self-learning algorithm designed to evolve through every network it touched. If someone wanted it to complete itself, they were waiting for it to grow powerful enough to control everything it connected to. Her voice came out quiet but sharp. "It means they're using me, and this base, as a live node." The realization settled between them like smoke. Every repair, every recalibration, every piece of code she'd touched since returning had strengthened the cipher's reach. Jack spoke carefully. "Then whoever's behind this isn't done with you." She stood slowly. "No, they've just started." That night the base seemed to hold its breath again. The soldiers slept, the corridors silent except for the hum of standby lights. Avina stayed in her office, the glow of her terminal painting her face in shifting blues and golds. She opened the encrypted file from the trace again and read the command chain metadata. General Corvin Vale. The name appeared again, buried deep in the authorization tree. He hadn't been a puppet, he was the architect. Her chest felt heavy, not with fear but betrayal. He had been the one to mentor her, to bring her into covert intelligence, to tell her that purpose meant sacrifice. And she had believed him, blindly, completely. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. It was Ressa. The young officer stood hesitantly in the doorway, eyes rimmed with sleeplessness. "Ma'am, you asked me to keep watch on outgoing signals. There's something you need to see." Avina gestured for her to enter. Ressa slid a tablet across the desk. "This came through the secondary network 15 minutes ago. It's not from command, it's personal." Avina activated it, the screen filled with text, a message. "You weren't supposed to survive Syria. You weren't supposed to question Holt, but you did. You built the cipher to protect and they turned it into a weapon. It's learning again. It's growing inside the command net. You can still stop it, but not from there. Find the source. Trust no one, not even me." It was unsigned, but the writing style, the rhythm, the clipped phrasing, she recognized it instantly. It was Vale. She stared at the message for a long moment, the sound of rain faint against the window. "He's not covering it up anymore," she murmured. "He's playing both sides." Ressa looked confused. "Why would he warn you if he's behind it?" "Because," Avina said quietly, "men like him don't believe they can lose. Even when they confess, they're still testing your loyalty." She stood, tucking the tablet under her arm. "Wake the command crew. We're going dark again. No transmissions, no uplinks. We clean house one last time." By dawn, the base was sealed off. The outside world might as well have stopped existing. For the next 10 hours, every terminal, every feed, every drive was scrubbed. Avina led the operation herself, moving from station to station, her voice calm, focused. No one asked why, they just obeyed. By evening, only one system remained untouched, the legacy Phoenix mainframe buried beneath the comm tower. It was old but still operational, powered by its own separate grid. If the cipher had a heart, that was it. She descended into the mainframe vault alone. The walls buzzed faintly with static. Old wires hung from the ceiling like veins, still pulsing with energy. The central console blinked with the same emblem that had haunted her career, the burning bird of Phoenix Division. She approached slowly, her reflection flickering in the glass. The screen recognized her immediately. "Welcome back, Commander A. Sultan." Her breath caught. The system's voice was cold, automated, but it wasn't random. It was hers. She had built this interface years ago, coded her own voice into its recognition protocol. "Run diagnostic," she said quietly. The machine obeyed. "Network integration, 96%. Cipher evolution, nearing completion. Awaiting final sequence authorization." Her hand trembled slightly. "Define final sequence." "Command transfer." "To whom?" "Primary architect, Corvin Vale." The air in the room seemed to vanish. He hadn't been trying to destroy her command. He'd been using it to channel every repaired system, every restored node, into his control network. Once complete, he could command every autonomous defense unit from orbit to ground. And she had helped him. "Override protocol," she whispered. "Authorization Sultan 01. The system paused. "Authorization invalid. Command lock engaged. Final sequence will initiate in T-30 minutes." Avina exhaled slowly. The machine wasn't listening anymore. She tapped her earpiece. "Jax, I need a hardline override now. Route every remaining backup through manual relay." Jax's voice came back strained. "Ma'am, I thought we shut down those systems." "We did," she said. "Now we wake them up again. It's the only way to burn it out." "Ma'am, if we do that, it'll destroy the core, I know." Silence crackled on the line then. "Copy that." Within minutes, the generators rumbled to life across the base, lights flickering under the power surge. Avina worked fast, entering manual commands, fingers moving with the muscle memory of an old language she hadn't used in years. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cold air. Then the voice returned, calm and unfeeling. "Command transfer in progress. Authorization, Vale Prime." "Not today," she whispered. She tore the main access conduit from the console, sparks bursting in her face. Alarms shrieked. Systems whined under overload. The floor trembled as the mainframe began to destabilize. Jax's voice shouted through the comm, "Ma'am, you're overloading the reactor grid." "That's the point," she shouted back. "If it completes the transfer, everything falls." Static crackled, then the line went dead. The lights dimmed. The air filled with the sharp electric scent of burning metal. She reached for the manual override lever, rusted, half broken, but still functional. She pulled it with everything she had. The sound was deafening. A surge of power roared through the chamber, followed by silence so pure it felt unreal. The monitors went dark. The emblem faded. The cipher was gone. When she woke, the room was smoke and ash. Emergency lights blinked weakly through the haze. Her hands were cut, her uniform torn, but she was breathing. Ressa's voice came faintly through the comm. "Ma'am, it's over. Systems offline. We thought we lost you." Avina sat up slowly, wincing. "Not yet," she murmured, "but we lost something else." "Command." She looked around at the darkened core, the burned circuits, the silence where a living code had been. No, the illusion of control. Outside, dawn was breaking again, pale light cutting through smoke and rain. She climbed the stairs slowly, each step echoing through the ruined bunker. The wind hit her face when she emerged. It smelled of dust and ozone, clean and heavy. The base was quiet, but not dead. Jax ran toward her, relief breaking through his exhaustion. "You did it," he said. She shook her head gently. "We did what we had to, nothing more." He smiled faintly. "Still sounds like winning." She looked out toward the horizon, where the first sunlight touched the wet sand, and for a moment she almost believed him. But deep down, she knew better. Wars like this didn't end. They just changed form. And as long as there were systems built on lies, people like her would never know peace, only purpose. The desert was still again. But this time, it wasn't silence born of fear. It was the kind that comes after a storm, when the land holds its breath, remembering everything it's endured. 3 days had passed since the core collapse. The smoke had cleared, the comm systems were offline, and the air on Horvath 7 smelled faintly of iron and rain. The cipher was gone, burned out completely. The old systems were nothing more than twisted metal and melted circuits, yet in their absence something fragile and alive remained. Life. Avina Sultan stood at the edge of the runway, her uniform still marked with soot and cuts that hadn't yet healed. The wind tugged at her sleeves, carrying the faint sound of hammers from the hangar, crews working to rebuild what could be saved. She'd barely slept since it ended. When she closed her eyes, she still saw the light, the white-hot flash when the core went under. And sometimes she thought she heard the machine's voice in her dreams. Cold, methodical, her own voice reflected back at her from the past. "Welcome back, Commander A. Sultan." She built something meant to protect, and it had nearly devoured everything she loved. Now all she could do was make sure it stayed dead. Footsteps approached softly from behind. Ressa Kaur stopped beside her, the young officer's face pale in the sunlight, her right arm in a sling. "Ma'am," she said quietly, "the medics are asking when you're coming in for debrief." Avina didn't look away from the horizon. "Tell them I'm not ready to talk yet." Ressa hesitated. "They're saying Command wants a statement about what happened in the core." Avina's lips curved slightly, not a smile, just a tired exhale of irony. "Of course they do. They're calling it a containment malfunction." Avina turned her head slowly, meeting her eyes. "Is that what they told you to call it too?" Ressa swallowed. "No, ma'am, I told them I didn't know what to call it." Avina studied her for a long moment. There was a steadiness in Ressa now that hadn't been there before, a kind of fragile courage built on guilt and survival. "That's the first honest answer I've heard all week," she said quietly. Ressa looked down. "You saved us, ma'am." Avina shook her head. No, I destroyed something I helped create. There's a difference. The wind swept between them, carrying the faint scent of fuel and dust. For a long moment they just stood there, two soldiers staring out at a sky that had almost ended. Then Avina asked softly, "What are they saying about Vale?" Ressa hesitated. Officially, he's missing. His last transmission vanished from the command network, no record of his location. Avina nodded slowly. That's how ghosts like him survive. They don't die, they just move on to new rooms. She turned away from the runway and started walking. Ressa fell into step beside her. The base looked scarred, power lines blackened from the surge, control towers half-functional, sand piled against the damaged hangars, but people were working again. They were talking, rebuilding, breathing. It felt human again. When she reached the operations center, Jax was already there, hunched over a makeshift desk of salvaged monitors. He looked up, his glasses smudged, exhaustion etched deep into his face. "Ma'am," he said, straightening instinctively. "Sit down, Jax," she said softly. "You've earned it." He hesitated. "I still can't believe it worked. We wiped the cipher completely, not a trace left in the network." Avina picked up a small fragment of melted circuit board from his desk, turning it over in her fingers. "There's always a trace," she said. "The question is whether it learns from the last one." He frowned. "You think it'll come back?" "Not the code," she said, "but the idea. Someone will build it again. They always do, maybe under a different name, a different justification. The cycle repeats until someone decides to break it for good." He nodded slowly, understanding the weight behind her words. "You think that's our job?" "No," she said. "Ours was to survive it. The next one, that's someone else's burden." He sat back thoughtful. "And you, ma'am, what happens to you now?" She didn't answer right away. Her gaze drifted toward the window where the sunlight caught the ridges of the desert beyond. "I'll write my report. I'll tell them what they need to hear, not what they want to know. Then I'll go where they can't use me anymore." Jack smiled faintly, though his eyes were sad. "You mean you're leaving?" "I mean," she said quietly, "I'm done being someone else's weapon." He didn't try to argue. He just nodded. "Then I guess we'll hold the line until they send another commander." Avina looked at him, really looked. The boy who'd once doubted her now sat at her desk, running systems she'd trusted no one with. "They don't need another commander," she said. "They need someone who remembers why this place mattered." He looked up startled. "You mean?" "You'll take interim command," she said. "Effective immediately. Ressa will assist you." Jax blinked, caught between pride and disbelief. "Ma'am, I'm not." "Yes, you are," she interrupted. "Because you question everything, and that's the only kind of leader worth following." She placed the fragment of circuit board on the desk, her final reminder of the system they'd beaten. Then she turned toward the door. Outside, the sky had shifted from gold to blue. The storm had scrubbed it clean, leaving only thin ribbons of cloud drifting east. She walked across the tarmac toward the small transport pad where a single chopper waited, its blades motionless in the still air. Ressa and Jax followed, stopping a few steps behind her. "Where will you go?" Ressa asked quietly. Avina paused, the wind catching her hair. "Wherever the silence doesn't feel like punishment." She looked back at them, two young soldiers who'd come through hell and found something resembling grace. "Keep this place alive," she said. "Not for the reports, for the people who believed they didn't matter until they did." Ressa saluted. Jax did too, wordless. Avina returned the gesture, crisp, precise, and then climbed into the chopper. The engine whined to life, kicking up dust and sand. The wind tore across the base, scattering papers and loose tarp. She didn't look back as the aircraft lifted. The desert unfolded beneath her, wide, endless, ancient. The scars of the base grew smaller until they were just faint marks against the earth. She exhaled, a sound that was part relief, part mourning. The radio crackled in her headset. "This is Horvath 7, Jax's voice came through, steady and calm. "Godspeed, ma'am." She smiled faintly. "You too, Captain." The call ended. Silence again, but this time it was the kind she'd earned. Hours later, the chopper touched down at an isolated outpost near the mountains. The air was thin, colder here, the horizon framed by jagged peaks. An old safe house stood half buried in the sand. It wasn't much, a single room, a desk, a small communications unit. Inside, she found what she'd been looking for, a file sealed in red. The label read Phoenix Archives, Terminated Project Summary. She opened it slowly. At the top, in Vale's handwriting, were the words, "The true test of control is not in commanding systems, but in convincing others they're powerless without you." She stared at the page for a long time. Then she took out her lighter, an old brass piece from her field kit, and set the corner of the file alight. The flame caught quickly, curling the pages into black ash. When it was done, she whispered, "Not anymore." She stepped outside, the cold wind brushing against her face. The horizon burned with the colors of sunset, violet, gold, and red bleeding together. She stood there until the last light faded, until the desert stars began to appear one by one, scattered like fragments of something infinite. Her thoughts drifted back to everything she'd lost and everything she'd refused to lose. The laughter of soldiers who once doubted her, the quiet faith of the ones who stayed, the storm, the fire, the silence afterward. War had a way of erasing people, but sometimes in the ashes something survived, not victory, not even peace, but clarity. The wind shifted again, carrying her whisper across the empty plain. "Maybe the point was never to win," she murmured. "Maybe it was just to walk away without losing yourself." She looked up one last time at the stars. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the need to report to anyone. No rank, no orders, no command chain, just her. A soldier who had learned that sometimes power isn't in shouting louder. It's in walking quietly when the world expects you to kneel. She turned away from the burning horizon and walked into the darkness, her silhouette dissolving into the vast expanse of desert. The storm had ended, but her story, the one written in silence, courage, and dust, would remain. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And when it's done, it walks away, leaving only the echo of truth behind.